the 14th day of September 2024. School and the church in general. So welcome. And the last part is there's no better place to be, Pat, than what? There you go. There's no better place to be than right here. You're going to the back of the class. You're going to have to make up for that during the quiz. You're going to have to make up for that misstep. There's no better place to be than right here. Absolutely, there's no better place to be. So let's see. Here's what I hope you will endure for the next hour. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about the week. We're going to talk for just a little bit about a little article on Chinese repression of religion. You know, we read in the Bible about oppression and we go, way back then, okay? But this article that we'll just briefly touch on is, you could read it today and think it was coming from the Bible, the way it is being meted out. So religious oppression has never ended. And we need to be cognizant of that as we move towards the last days so we are prepared. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about Chinese repression. We will also have, I also want to bring another little article about, we talk about what we could do in the community. Okay. And so here is a religious school program, which is absolutely fascinating. And we've kind of talked about one of the skills that we have as Adventists is biblical knowledge. And I firmly believe we are the most learned biblical scholars going. So we'll have a little article about that. And then we'll talk about the lesson. Okay? And we're doing in this week's lesson, if you don't want to do any of that, while I talk, Mark 14. Okay? So Mark 14, we do have a quiz today. We do have a quiz. Hope everybody studied their lesson. Here's the questions. What is the passion narrative? Okay, that's question number one. What chapter of Mark is it? Which I just gave you the answer. The guests at dinner were appalled by what they considered a grand waste of wages. Who is that? What was Judas's motive? We'll talk about that. That's in the quiz. Who said, "The poor you will always have with you"? Okay, question. Everyone else may fall away. Who said that? Okay, we'll talk about that. What does the name of Gethsemane mean? He will not remove the cup of suffering. Why? Why? Who gets his ear cut off? The young man, instead of leaving all to follow Jesus, leaves all to flee Jesus. What did he leave? The last question is about the Sanhedrin. Okay? Who are the Sanhedrin? What are they like? Okay? So, that's today's quiz that we hope in the next hour, in an hour from now, we'll go, oh yeah, we know all those. Okay? That's the goal. All right. So how's your week? Anything interesting? An amazing event. I can broadcast.
I saw God work.
You
Definitely,
saw God work.
for sure. Yes. Last Sabbath, Kyle needed a meal. So ahead of time, to get that set up, I called Lois. She was sick. So she and I were going to do that.
Yep.
So then the next step was some of those who had been scheduled but didn't have to do it in the past.
Uh-huh.
So that would be Monica and I. Monica had a house full of Spanish-speaking guests,
Uh-huh.
so that wasn't going to work.
Uh-huh.
So another couple that didn't have to was Guillermo and Maritza. So I called them. They said, we have a birthday party going, but we can handle you. So we went there. Here's the amazing part. Melanie's fiance had his parents there.
Mm-hmm.
His dad spent the year between junior and senior college on a mission trip to Thailand.
Is that right? So,
Yes, they
So
connected.
Kyle and him
Yes.
went
Yeah.
off to the corner and talked about Thailand.
So the engineering of those three steps to get there was totally God's
Couldn't have
doing.
been any better. Absolutely. Awesome. And you live to tell about it. Okay, anything else about your week? Good morning. It is good to see you guys as always. And you know what my next comment is going to be. You know what it's going to be. The color and the smile, makes my day. I'm telling you, makes my day. Okay, so the one little thing that sometimes I'll just give my opinion here. So I spent some time in Knoxville, Tennessee this week, and so you kind of listen to the local radio, local TV, blah blah blah, and then I compare that to where we are here in Indy, and Indy is becoming a very maybe I don't need to tell you, it's very violent, because I listened to the Knoxville local news all week, and quite frankly, I don't remember them talking about a shooting, and literally, every day here, there's violence, lethal violence, and it is very sad to see what's happened to the city. I don't know other than to say that, but we don't want to be too complacent here with putting up with violence, I think, Okay, so we'll move on. Anything else about the week? Chinese repression, religious repression, okay? This was yesterday, September 13th. China expands its religious repression. And so I offer this up really twofold. As I said, sometimes we read in the Bible about repression in the Bible and we go, wow, what a great story. How fascinating. But it's going on today, okay? And so real people behave similarly, okay? Real people behave similarly. And the other thing just to be mindful of is, China is a one government system. Governments are very, you got to be careful. Okay, so here we go. Police. Now think about, and also think about this as we sit here. Think about this as we sit here, if that's what's happening here. Okay? Because it could. All right. Police showed up at the Early Rain Covenant Church in Chengdu, China, in the early morning on September 1st. 50 people had gathered to worship in a rented conference room around 9 a.m. Could that be here? Wow, sounds like us. 10 authorities had detained the church elder, Li Yang, and Pastor Wu. The rest tried to carry on singing hymns and praying together. Within hours, the police returned and took away Yong Hong and Zheng Quito, a pastor and a deacon, respectively. The power was cut off. The congregation was told to leave the building. The leaders remained in custody and could be moved to longer-term criminal detention centers in the coming days. This is the price of religious worship in China, and it's rising. So there's a whole article that describes it, okay? But I think we need to be understanding that could be here someday. In the last days, it could be easily here. So when we read about it in the Bible, we read about in far off China, you know, it could happen here and happen sooner than we think. So it's incumbent upon us to read, study, be aware, and be prepared, right? Okay. All right. Here's another article I thought I'll share with you guys. And again, if you don't, Mark 14 is where the lesson is today. Okay, this I thought was very interesting. Religious school program grows. And this is up very close to Angola, Indiana. Garrett. Okay, Garrett, Indiana, which is north of Fort Wayne and just south of one of God's favorite cities in the world, Angola, Indiana. Okay? Some of us are very familiar with Angola. In Garrett, every Tuesday during the school year, hundreds of students file out of the J.E. Ober Elementary, climb on a red, likewise Academy bus for a 3-minute drive to an off-campus storage space converted into a classroom. When they arrive, the students pile out of the bus, find their seats, and pull out their Bibles. How about that? About a quarter of the students at this elementary in Garrett, a community 30 miles north of Fort Wayne, participate in this independent elective religious education course offered by the middle school. How about that? Who would have thought? Such classes are often called release time programs, have existed in some form for over a century. One of the first places the model was implemented was Gary in the early 1900s. This is called LifeWise, this program. LifeWise now has more than 2,200 students from about 15 schools in Indiana for the school year 23-24. This year, the number is expected to triple to 45. 45. It is unclear exactly how many, because there are separate from schools and not publicly funded, and they operate independently from one another. So there's no comprehensive list. In Evansville, for example, 776 students in the district participated in Weekday Evansville, a Cass County program which has existed and enrolled 625 students. Another 585 students participated in Morgan County Weekday Religious Education Program. And Huntington County reported 844 students by the time the program started. So the article goes on and on, okay? And so what I bring that attention to is as we look for things we can do, okay? And as I say, I think there's a huge thirst out there, regardless of what the media might portray. There is a huge thirst out there for God's word. You talk to your neighbors, you talk to families, and that thirst is out there. And the article goes on to go, it really does compete with sports and music and social norms, but even then you can see how the program is growing, you know? And so, again, I kind of chart this away that says, as we look for our spot in the community, is this something we could do? So we'll just chart that away. But I thought it was it was a little surprising because I don't have kids in school anymore, but it's very surprising that it exists and it is proliferating. Okay. All right. So we'll move on. Mark 14 is our lesson today. Let's see, a couple of things. We're in the quiz. What is the Feast of Unleavened Bread? What was that about? The feast.
It's the Passover feast.
It is Passover. Passover happens during that festival, right? The unleavened festival happens for 7 days. Yeah, 7 days, right? And then we'll talk about, well, what's Passover, just to make sure everybody understands Passover. What's unleavened festival? What's that about? Some key aspects of the Feast of the Unleavened Bread include eating unleavened bread. Why unleavened bread? Tastes better?
Leaven is equated to sin.
Leaven is equated to sin, right? And so the bread represents Christ's body, right? So sin is removed. There's also one other little nuance with unleavened bread, right?
I don't know if this is what you're talking about, but in Egypt, when they were fleeing, they did not put the leaven in because they didn't have time.
Right.
So-
Exactly.
So it can remind them of God's deliverance.
Exactly, because they were told by the Egyptians, you guys get out of here. And so they went, ooh, well, we don't have time to let the bread rise, right? So boom, off they went, right? So it was unleavened bread. All right. All right, so one little quick reminder, Passover. So I just walk in off the street and you go, Passover, tell me what that's about. Passover, is that like bunny rabbits and chocolate and Easter eggs? What's it about? So I'm a newbie. And I go, man, I've had this question. I don't understand Passover. Just give me a couple of sentences. Oh, what happened with Passover? Yes.
Commemorating when God passed over and saw the blood on the doorpost, that the firstborn of each family was not slain.
So I'm still not understanding. What did they pass over? How'd that work? Maybe I'm going to retract what I said earlier. Maybe we'll all be enrolled in the Bible school before we have the kids in here.
So it's referring to the children of Israel when they were in Egypt. This was the 10th plague, and angel of death was coming, and they were going to kill all the firstborn. The children of Israel were told to slay a lamb, put the blood around their doorposts, and the firstborn was to be inside. They would be covered by the blood, and the angel would pass over or not kill them.
There we go. So the angel would pass over the houses that had the blood of the sacrificial lambs on the front door. Okay? So that's Passover. All right, so on with the lesson. Here we go. Mark chapter 14. If you have your Bibles, let's wade into Mark 14. Everybody ready? Okay, so Mark 1. We'll just read a little bit, talk about it. Now the Passover and the festival of the unleavened bread were only 2 days away. So that's kind of why we introduced Passover and unleavened bread, okay? Just so you know why I got there. One of the chief priests and teachers of the law were scheming to arrest Jesus to secretly kill him. Why? He's a threat, right? He is a social and political threat that they have had enough. They're losing their grip on the people. Chapter 2, or verse 2. But like all good politicians, they want to kill him, but then they go, well, not during the festival, though. That would be a little too rude here. But not during the festival, or the people may riot. Oof, then we'd really lose our grip. While he was in Bethany, reclining, this is such a rich, Mark does such a great job of being descriptive at some points, okay? It doesn't just say, well, he was in Bethany at the home of Simon. While he was in Bethany reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper. Isn't that a great picture? You go, he's a real man. He's a real person. You can just feel him, getting tired at the end of the day. Whew, I'm just going to chill. And it brings that human element that we could all relate to. Okay, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. So what did the people say? Were they going, oh, this lady is awesome? They said, what a waste. What do you think you're doing? And was this lady, David, good to see you, was she one of society's elite and brought in her, I'll get this one off the rack? And she was well known. Was she rich or poor? She was not very wealthy at all. She had perfume, right? Okay, so here we go. It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor, and they rebuked her harshly. So what did Jesus say? Leave her alone, right? Leave her alone. Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. Next quiz question, okay? Who wants to read verse 7?
Mark 14:7 says, "For you have the poor with you always, and whenever you wish, you may do good to them. But me you do not have always."
Boy, if you're sitting there, isn't this yet another kind of surprise to the people that are there? Because this is really kind of a twist of what your preconceived notion that Jesus would say versus what happened. Because wouldn't out of the box we would go, Jesus just wants to take care of the poor, and we'll do all we can for that. So yeah, you guys are right. We'll let this go this time, but we really always got to take it for. But that didn't happen, right?
If you go into Luke talking about the same story, it describes this woman in Luke 7:37, a woman in the city who was a sinner. So I think a lot of it, they were, their view of her was skewed because of the life that she lived. If somebody else would have done that to Jesus, they may have viewed it differently. I don't know.
If one of the Sanhedrin, oh, well, there we go.
Plus, one other thing to keep
And that's what you had said earlier, right, Ruth? You said, well, she was known. And we could conject here that says, a lady that's known in the community, she has this perfume. We could make some extrapolation, but we won't today.
The perfume was expensive, which means she must have saved for a while to have this. And the only thing that has come to mind is last week when we had covered the widow and her 2 mites, where she gave everything that she had, which was those 2 little mites, which were like nothing, but that's all she had. And here, this lady here had expensive perfume. Doesn't say she had any other wealth or anything else of value other than this, but she gave it and anointed Jesus with it. Just like when the widow gave everything that she had for the cause.
Right.
Which means we're looking at the motive of why they did what they did.
Right. Right.
I see a correlation there.
Okay, so we'll kind of whisk on here. Truly, I'm in verse 9, should you care. Truly, I tell you, whenever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in the memory of her. Interesting. You said that? It's going to go down in the Bible as being very, very famous, right? Good morning. It's good to see you. We are in Mark 14, and we're dredging around like verse 10. Okay? We're in verse 10. So who's Judas? Enter stage Judas. Judas was what? He was one of the 12, right? Not just recently introduced to Jesus, right? He was the treasure. Good answer. So, Rodney, you can have sympathy for this guy, but so Judas was the treasure. He's one of the disciples. Tell me the story of Judas. What happened to Judas? Ooh. So Judas, what do you think? Good guy, or we'll just start off here, real simple. Good guy or bad guy? He ends up not very good, right? He ends up very bad.
He's a good guy, he's a disciple. But he's got a flaw. He likes money.
Okay. So he's a greedy soul.
Power he liked.
Ooh. The first time in humanity, power and money. First time ever that's corrupted somebody. Ivan.
Because he's one of the apostles means that Jesus was one of the chosen disciples. He's not just an ordinary disciple. So at the very start, he's a good man.
That's a very important point, Ivan, that just says he was in the inner sanctum, so to speak. One of the 12.
But interesting point on that. He kind of got himself in there. Like, Jesus didn't call Judas. Judas asked, if I remember correctly, to be part of the 12.
Okay, so he wormed his way in. That never happens. People don't never worm their way into stuff, right? Never. All right. So, tell me a little bit more. Judas. Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to do what? To betray him. And this is the part that is, verse 11 is awesome. They were delighted to hear this, and they promised to give him money. So he watched for an opportunity to hand him over. They were delighted. We've got ourselves a greedy traitor. Ooh. We penetrated the armor. So all those politicians are going, we have penetrated the armor. We didn't just get somebody in the cheap seats. We got somebody in the inner 12. We're making inroads here, right? Okay. So let's see. Let's go down to verse 13. So they're in the festival of the unleavened bread, which we know about now, right? Festival of the unleavened bread, 7 days, right? So he went. So he sent two of his disciples, telling them, "Go into the city." This sounds like a familiar story again, if you followed with us earlier, about the colt. Okay? So he says to two of the disciples, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him." Did he know? Did they know this man? No. There'll be somebody in the city. Too good. Carry a jar of water. Go get him. Say to the owner of the house, he enters, "The teacher asks, 'Where is my room? Where may I eat the Passover with my disciples?'" So what are we leading up to here? The Last Supper. We're leading up to the Last Supper. Okay? Why is it called the Last Supper? Another quiz question. The last meal that Jesus had with his disciples, right? Very good. Thanks for helping out. Okay, so that's the Last Supper. When evening came, Jesus arrived with the 12. While they were reclining at the table, he said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who is with me." So we'll kind of speed along. Who might that be? You're right. It's Peter. Exactly. Peter said what? Peter said, all the rest of them may fall, not me. I am bulletproof. I will be with you always. Right? Yes. He said, "You can count on me. You can count on me." Okay. And the proof of that was in verse 29. Peter declared, "Even if all fall away," Mike, "I will not." Verse 29. Peter declared, "Even if I fall away, I will, even if all fall away, I won't." And Jesus said, did Jesus say, "Peter, you're a good man. I knew I could count on you"? We're buds. Thick and thin, I knew I could count on you, Peter. Maybe not. Verse 30, he says, "Truly I tell you, today, yes, tonight, before the rooster crows twice, you yourself will disown me." Not one, not two, 3 times. What does it mean to disown? Well, what is he saying? What does Peter do to disown Jesus? Well, what's just one of the examples? What's that? He denied what?
Didn't know him at all.
Denied knowing him, right? When things got in a little bit of a pinch, right? There was a crowd around. What did Peter do? The crowd asked him, right? The crowd said, "Hey, you know this guy, right?"
He also denied, he did not want to be known as a follower of Jesus. It's one thing to know somebody,
Yes.
and another thing to follow them.
Yes. And the crowd said, "We've seen you with them." And he said, "No, I don't know what you're talking about." So what would that mean for us when times, think about the people in China that we talked about earlier. People in China. Okay, and remember they said there were like 50 people, the authorities come through the door. It would be like some of the people going, I don't know what's going on here. I thought they were going to be handing out free bags of rice, right? I wasn't here to study. That's not what I was doing. Don't arrest me, right? Would that ever happen to us? So that's kind of why, that is why, and when I say this, I'm looking in the mirror here, okay? So make sure you get the right context. That is why we study this stuff, right? That's why we study the Bible, not because it is very intriguing stories, but in the future, it could be us. Right now, somebody could come through and go, close the church down. And we would, and so the council wouldn't be like me saying, well, we aren't having church, we're getting ready to go out and do a 5-mile run, so this is just our training discussion. Okay? It would be standing up, right? It would be us being able to stand up and say, I am here to study the Word of God. That's why I'm here. Peter didn't do that, did he? Didn't do it. So it's not just, oh, shame on Peter, he was a weak guy. It is, this could be human nature that we learn from.
When Jesus was arrested and people saw this, or some people, because when they accused Peter, of Peter being associated, when somebody's arrested, you automatically assume they must have done something bad. And because they remembered that he was a follower, he was an apostle, they assume, well, maybe you're just as bad. Aren't you one of his followers? And he realizes it's not advantageous to be identified with him, so that's why he denied him. But the same could be said for us. People who don't know what a Seventh-day Adventist is they say, hey, are you a Seventh-day Adventist? Or I heard this about Seventh-day Adventists. And if it's a negative connotation, we humanly would want to back away and say, well, I don't know anything about that.
Who are they?
The world. People who aren't Adventists, people who know next to nothing or have heard maybe a bad report and just have made an assumption and say, hey, don't you go to church on Saturday? Aren't you one of them? Aren't Seventh-day Adventists a cult? That type of connotation. And people are like, whoa, wait a minute. Hey, whoa. I don't want to be connected with that negativity.
Right.
Because whether we want to admit it to ourselves or not, everyone is image conscious.
Oh.
And if the PR is great, hey, yeah, we're right up front. That's right, I'm part of this. If the PR is bad, we want to back away and go into the shadows, say, I have nothing to do with this.
Excellent. Excellent to have you here. Good to see you. We are dredging around in Mark 14, and we're kind of in the area of verse 35. Okay? Now, you weren't here for the first few questions, the quiz primer, but we have a quiz. The rest of the group here is crackerjack sharp, so you might be bringing up the curve. Okay? Just warning you. What is the meaning of Gethsemane? What is that thing? Gethsemane. Is Gethsemane the name of the tree? Is Gethsemane the name of a rock? Is Gethsemane an olive press? David, where are you from? Where's your heritage? From Spain, right? And in Spain, there's probably 1 or 2 olive trees, right? And so what happens to those little olives that you pluck those olives off? Some you eat and some you press, right? Right? Some you press. So Gethsemane means what? leaving the city, leaving the walled city of Jerusalem, where they ate the Passover meal, okay? Jesus and his disciples go across the Kidron Valley to a garden on the slopes of the Mount of Olives. The name Gethsemane means oil press. Come on in. We have plenty of seats. We're happy that you're here. Very good. Sir, good to see you. First time here. What's your name? Bernie May. Verdi, okay. Verdi, excellent. Thank you, sir. Are you visiting in the area? Do you live here?
I live in Whitestown. I go to the church in Cicero.
Very good. Whitestown, awesome place. Awesome.
Got a lot of construction going on in that area, and I just thought,
Well, you are welcome here. Okay, so back to Gethsemane. Gethsemane is the name means oil press, suggesting that there was olive oil processing in the area. The exact location is unknown because the Romans cut down all the trees on the Mount of Olives during the siege of AD 70. Okay, so what happens next? So they've had the Last Supper, they're in the Mount of Olives. What happens now? Verse 34. Well, let's back up to 32 just to get the right context. Verse 32. They went to a place called Gethsemane, which means oil press, Donnie, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." Sit here while I pray. He took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. Why? Jesus said he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. Why?
His mission was about to be accomplished.
He had to go through the suffering, and he knew it was going to happen.
So he was deeply distressed and troubled because of the future or the past?
Future.
Okay.
See, why he deeply distracted means troubled, because he was having all the sin of this world. He's carrying, and plus, when the crucifixion comes, you have no connection with Father God. That's why, because they are separating from them, God and Jesus. That's the reason he knows it. They are separating.
What has Jesus seen for his first 33 years? What has he had to experience?
Because always he was with the Father, talked to him, even though he was in there.
But absolutely, I'm not. But what has brought this deep sorrow on Jesus? Has it been just a walk in Gethsemane, sipping oil and eating manna and kicking back in people's house, and it's been like a nice ride? Has he been highly accepted? Who are these people that he's being rebelled against?
His own people.
His own people, okay? So his own people. You can imagine if you go to your family reunion, and you go, oh, I can't wait to see these people. They bring great food, all this. And what do they do to you? They tell you, you're a terrible person. What are you doing here? We never did like your food. We want to excommunicate you from the family. How are you going to feel?
You look like you are left out.
You're deeply hurt, right? And then that's not the end of the story. To Rodney's point, he also knows the future. He knows the family's going to rebel and do bad things, right?
And in his ministry before this, he kept, things would happen and he would say, the time has not come, the time has not come, the time has not come. And now he has such a close relationship with God that he knows this is the time.
Yep.
This is the reason why he has been here,
Yeah.
and it's heavy.
The sand is run out on the sand aisle. Okay, so verse 34. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. And he's telling the three, Peter, James, and John, stay here and keep watch. Stay here and keep watch. So, clearly they stayed there, kept watch, never fell asleep. They did stay there. They stayed right there, didn't move a muscle. So he says, stay there, because what's he going to do? He's going to go pray, talk to the Lord, right? So he's telling the three, stay there. I'm going to go over here for a little bit, pray. Stay there, keep watch, keep a level eye. Where's my pathfinders? Keep a level eye. Verse 36, Abba, Father, he said, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me. What is he talking? Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. It's the cup of suffering, right? He's saying, he's really suffering, okay? What do you guys think is worse, mental suffering or physical suffering? What do you guys think? Because we know coming up in the story, in Jesus' life, we know there's going to be physical suffering, right? Think about your own lives now. What's worse, mental suffering or physical suffering? Just think about that. We'll move on. Jesus, at this point, was suffering mentally, right? It was all internal, his suffering. Think about what would be worse in your life. Okay. So, then he returned to the disciples, and he found them sleeping. He found them sleeping. Simon, he said to Peter, are you asleep? Couldn't you watch for 1 hour? Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Why do you think that little piece is in this story? Why do you think?
I mean, to be brutally honest,
Yes.
there are times when I am praying and then I wake up.
You are praying so deeply.
And I've memorized it from Matthew, but those verses because I resonate with them so much. You know, my spirit is willing, but my flesh is so weak.
You've got one job to do. Peter, James, John, you got one job to do. Stay awake, keep guard. And they fell asleep. Is that us? We've got one job to do. Have a relationship with God. We got one task. That's all we got, one. We have one single task, right? I'm speaking to us, I'm speaking to me, not us. We've got one task at hand, that's to have a relationship with God. Sometimes we fall asleep, right? Okay, so it only happened once though, I'm sure. Once more, he went away and prayed the same thing. What was he praying? He was praying for God to take the burden off of him, right?
I just wanted to make a point because I remember reading this. And in those days, crucifixion, if you look at the process and what it did to a body, it was the most unbearable way of dying. I mean, there was pulling of, and I looked it up because I wanted to see, it was much more painful, longer lasting than hanging, electrocution, gas chamber, firing squad and lethal injection. That was crucifixion. It was the worst way to die.
You don't die of bleeding out,
No,
right? You
it's
die of
slow death.
suffocation because your body kind of gives way and then you end up suffocating, right? All right, so back to the story. Once more, he went away and prayed the same thing. When he came back, Peter, James, and John were. How can that be? How can that be? They were sleeping again. They were sleeping. Do you think he should have went, okay, you three, go back to the group. I need another three. These guys aren't up to the task. I need another three. Where's Judas? When he came back, he found them sleeping again. They did not know what to say. Have we been there? Have we been there in our own little discussions with God? When you go, you know you have failed. You know you have failed. You're praying. You're talking to God. But you really don't know what to say. You go, oh, again. Again. Okay, so here we go again. Returning a third time. I'm over in verse 41. Returning the third time, he said to them, are you still sleeping and resting? Enough! The hour has come. Ooh. If you're Peter, James, and John, what are you thinking? He comes back a third time, and he sees them sleeping again, and Jesus says enough. Ooh. You wouldn't want to be in their shoes at that point. You wouldn't want to be there. The hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. The Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. It's kind of foretelling, right? Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer. So, enter who? Who's the betrayer? Judas, right? And so what is Judas, to fast forward, we got about 10 minutes left. How does that happen? How does Judas betray Jesus? He kind of gets with what? First of all, what's the plan? What's the plan?
The person that I kiss.
But who does he tell that to? Facebook?
The chief priests.
Who? The church leaders, right? Very important. He tells the church leaders, look, when we get together, I'm going to go kiss my good friend, Jesus, right? And then you will know. Right? So that's the plan. Boy, what a good guy, huh? What a good guy. Wow. It's like double-edged, right? And then, I don't know if we'll get to it or not, but even the people that he was working with, okay, the priests, did they have a lot of respect for Judas? No, they didn't, did they? They kind of went, oh, ick. Okay, now the betrayer had arranged a signal to them. The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard. Isn't that just fascinating? One of the 12 that had been with Jesus forever, seen all these miracles, seen everything that had happened. Everything that had happened, and he sold him out. Wow. Think about that. Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, Rabbi, and kissed him. The men seized him and arrested him. Then one of those standing near drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. What's that got to do with the story? Help me out here, you guys. This is the little question here where I'm going, I just don't know. Well, why did Mark write that? So let's just slow down for just a second and reread it. Then, so Judas does his thing, okay? The men seize Jesus and they arrest him. Verse 47, help me understand. Then one of those standing near drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. So then you go, let's break that down and say, well, why did he draw his sword? I don't know. And really, we're into the land of unknown, and I can only extrapolate. He drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. I don't know. Yes. Mark, about Mark. Your namesake.
I was seriously just trying to avoid this entire quarter, just to avoid Mark and Mark.
But I'd read it up.
One of the things that we can extrapolate from that is this was one of the ones nearby, so it was somebody closely associated with Jesus, and he was now being taken away. When we get into a situation like that, any of us, we'd be scared.
Right.
Our master is being taken away, we're going to be left rudderless, and his go-to was to grab his sword and defend him. Lash out. Mm-hmm. I need to do something, and that's what he had.
Right.
And I think what follows up immediately afterwards was very clear. Jesus immediately said, that's not what you need to do.
Right. So the guy who drew his sword, was he a friend or foe of Jesus?
Well, I would assume he's a friend of Jesus. He's trying to
go.
defend him.
There you go. So that's really the point. Okay. Okay, so let's move on. Verse 48. Verse 48, Jesus says what? Am I leading a rebellion, he said, that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Verse 49, every day I was with you teaching in the temple courts, and you did not arrest me, but the scriptures must be fulfilled. And then everyone deserted and fled. Every day I was with you teaching in the courts. You didn't arrest me. Then everyone deserted and fled. Whew. Okay, we'll move on. A young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus. When they seized him, did he try to help? No. He ran away naked, right? He ran away naked. All right. So, we're somewhere around verse 53 in the Sanhedrin. Who are the Sanhedrin again?
Church leaders?
The Sanhedrin. The FBI. Oh, interesting. FBI, CIA. They're the high court, right? They're the all-knowing, august leaders of the royal court, right? The biblical knowledge center, the Sanhedrin, the court, the Supreme Court, right? They took Jesus to the high priest and all the chief priests and the elders and the teachers of the law came together. Enter Peter. Here comes Peter. Peter followed him at a distance right into the courtyard of the high priest. He sat with the guards and warmed himself by the fire. So Peter is sitting there. He's with the guards going, oof, Wonder what's going on here, huh? What's going on? The chief of priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for evidence against Jesus so they could put him to death. Did they find any? They were looking for a reason to kill him, right? And so remember, he had a big following, right? Jesus had a big following. And so the court's kind of in a tough spot here, right? If they don't have justification, it's going to look kind of bad on them. And then the people, it could upset the people, right? We have that in our world today, right? I mean, leaders can't just go out and, when leaders go out and just kill people, then that's a sign of, well, we've got trouble, right? We've got trouble. Many falsely testified against him, but their statements did not agree. Some stood up, gave false testimony, blah, 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 blah. But Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. Again, the high priest asked him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" Did he take Peter's approach? Did Jesus, so right there. Then the high priest stood up, so if they heard all this melees, stood up and said, Are you not going to answer? What is the testimony? Are you the one? Okay? Again, the high priest asked him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" Peter would have stood up and said what? No, not me. No. I'm just here traipsing around the countryside, telling good stories. That's me. Right? All right. But Jesus said, verse 62, "I am," said Jesus, "and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One, coming on the clouds of heaven." Oh boy. Oh boy. What do you think the crowd went? What? So how did that go down with the crowd? This is the direct conflict now, right? Now it's reached the boiling point, right? Because the Sanhedrin are there to represent what? To support the cause, right? They're going to represent those in power and go, "We're the ones," right? But now Jesus faced up the high priest and said what? Okay, we'll read it again. When they ask him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" They're saying, Are you from God? Are you the Messiah?" And he said, "I am." And right there, the die was cast, right? Right there, that moment, the die was cast. Verse 63, the high priest tore his clothes. "Why do you need any more witnesses?" he said. Okay, so the high priest goes, "I've had enough." That's it right there. Proof. We've got to do away with him right now. So he's kind of going, right now, we're done. We've got to tamp this down. We're going to kill this guy. This is over. Boom. Okay, so it's not a good way to close, but let's just go through the quiz questions real quick. All right? What is the Passion narrative? What chapters are they? Mark 14 through 16. Excellent. The guests at dinner were appalled by what they considered a grand waste of a year's wages. And what was this grand waste of wages? It was the perfume by the lady that was well known in the community and not with a good reputation. What was Judas's motive? Greed, right? He was doing it for money. He sold out Jesus for money. Okay? Who said the poor will always have you? Jesus. How fascinating, okay? Who said this? Everyone else may fall away. Peter. Was that true? That wasn't true, was it? He was the first one to go. Kind of, sort of. Okay, Gethsemane means what? Right? And this happened at the Mount of Olives, right? Mount of Olives, hence a lot of olives and olive press. Gethsemane. He will not remove the cup of suffering. We didn't talk about this specifically. Why did God not remove the cup from Jesus? Salvation was at stake, right? Salvation of man was at stake. If he would have removed it, then it would be like, all for naught, right? All for naught. Who gets their ear cut off? Okay, the high priest's servant. Let's see, number 10. The young man, instead of leaving all to follow Jesus, does what? He runs away naked, right? He runs away naked. Left all his clothes and ran away. Good to see you. Jesus was being brought to the Sanhedrin. Who were they and what was their role? What was the role, in this case, of the Sanhedrin? Top judiciary. And what do you think their role was in this? The Sanhedrin, do you think it was a fair court of law? Where they going, we got all these august Sanhedrites. You go, we're going to hear the evidence and we'll make our own unbiased decision.
They wanted to kill him.
They had, from day one, right? From day one, the Sanhedrin knew the verdict, right? Now they just needed a little shred to go, well, here's why. And what was that why that came about? When Jesus said what? I am. When Jesus said, I am the Messiah sent from God, that was it. That was it. The Sanhedrin had what they needed and boom, now we march. Okay, let's bow for a word of prayer. Thank you, Lord, for an awesome class today. Thanks for everybody's participation. It is so illuminating to reread the story of your trial, Jesus' trial and crucifixion. May we take this knowledge, always apply it to today's life, and never let us be a Peter or a Judas. Be with us now. Amen.